Story 1. I once accidentally lost my driver's license through the small gap in the elevator doors. Slipped through and I thought it was gone. 10 years later it arrived in the mail. It was long expired, but it surprised me that a maintenance worker found it and took the trouble to return it. Story 2. I am a pest control technician. Snakes had gotten into the elevator pit and were climbing up and dropping onto people as they rode the elevator. Good times. Story 3. I worked at a hotel. A guest dropped their phone down the elevator shaft. After several failed attempts to retrieve it, we called the elevator technicians. They went down, retrieved the phone, and also found a carton of eggs. The eggs were rotten but not cracked. I do not understand how that could have happened accidentally. Story 4. More than 1,500 tax returns were at the bottom of the elevator shaft at the North Brisbane office of the Australian Taxation Office. Story 5. My dad was an elevator mechanic for about 15 years. He had a very dark sense of humor and came home with some of the craziest stories. For example, whenever he was in an elevator, he would shake it a little, tap the displays or buttons and say, "Yep, total piece of crap. Inferior piece of crap." I think he mostly did it to freak people out. One of my favorites. He got a call that someone was hearing strange noises coming from an elevator. He got inside, wrote it up, and sure enough he could hear it too. For half a second he thought it was a baby crying, then realized it was a cat. When he got to a certain floor he could hear a sad meowing. It obviously was not in the elevator car, so he went into the shaft and found a little orange kitty. Somehow it had gotten into the elevator shaft and was sitting in a spot between the floors where it would not get crushed by the elevator, but it could not get out. My dad saved it and gave it to the building manager to see if it belonged to anyone in the building. It was the one time he ever told us a story that involved him saving an animal instead of finding dead ones. Story 6. My father has a great story about this. He supervised the mechanics, and one of them called him from a psychiatric hospital and said that he had to see something. The maintenance worker had been called because the elevator did not sit level on the ground floor. It was about half an inch too high and both patients and staff kept tripping on it. All other floors were fine. When my father arrived, he found the maintenance worker laughing and looking down into the bottom of the shaft. There were probably tens of thousands of magazines down there. They had to bring several shovels, a small crew, and a rolling dumpster to clear it out. When it was all done, my father stayed behind and pretended to read a newspaper while he sat in the lobby. After about half an hour, he saw an elderly patient holding a magazine and shuffling slowly toward the elevator. The patient stopped in front of the doors, glanced left and right, quickly stooped down, slid the magazine into the gap, and shuffled away as fast as he could with a huge grin on his face. My father could not help but laugh. The man had probably been sliding magazines into the shaft many times each day for decades. I never asked whether my father reported it. It would not surprise me if he chose to let the man have his fun. Story 7. Our team accidentally dropped a steel anal dilator down the dumbwaiter shaft. When the technician picked it up from the floor, I will never forget his face when I said we needed it upstairs because it would be used in a patient's anus soon. It was priceless. I am a hospital technician, and handling rectal surgical tools is routine. Story 8. A couch. I am not joking. It was a walk-in pit that a homeless person had retrofitted into a small living room. Story 9. One of my baseball coaches, when I was a kid, lost his glass eye in the elevator shaft. The maintenance worker reacted with obvious surprise. Story 10. One time we were doing a rip-out at an old factory. They were gutting it and turning it into luxury apartments. The elevator we were removing was a filthy old freight elevator that had not run in years. When we finally ran it up, we went down to inspect the pit. It smelled like a dead body had been there for half a century. The bottom floor was dark, so I shone my flashlight under the elevator, and the whole floor started moving with roaches. It was nasty. I have not really found anything exciting, though. I have cleaned out more pits than I could count. I gave my mom a cheap ring I found. I found a pair of underwear at a hotel and a full packet at a courthouse containing a woman's case transcript. Once I worked on a modernization project and one of the hoistway doors had an advertisement sticker for a tennis restringing service. That was strange because it was someplace only an elevator technician should be able to reach. I called the number, but it was out of service. I have found some cool graffiti from the 1940s. That is about it. I worked on escalators for a year and a half. There was a lot more in those pits. I took home bent quarters every day. There were lots of shoe fragments, and I was always nervous about finding used needles in some units. Story 11. I am not a technician, but I work at a large hotel. A few years ago, one of our elevators stopped working. When maintenance opened it, they found a pile 3 feet high of guest folios that had never been delivered to the rooms. Reviewing security camera footage showed a security guard had grown tired of delivering them and dropped the folios down the elevator shaft for months until he was caught. Story 12. This question should be my jam, but unfortunately I have never found anything interesting. I once found a $2 coin, a dime bag of some unknown drug, syringes, and sets of keys. It is mostly just people's junk mail and empty chip bags down there. Story 13. Elevator technicians at the office complex where my father works found parts of the skeleton of a dog. They were not a complete skeleton, just random bones. Story 14. Too long. Did not read turds. For the record, I was not an elevator technician but hotel maintenance. A guest reported waterfall sounds in the elevator shaft on the way to the lobby. I investigated. The sump pump at the bottom of the shaft was running continuously. Water continued flowing from the drain it was connected to after I unplugged the pump. I learned from notes by third shift maintenance that multiple first-floor rooms had repeated clogged toilets all night. We called a plumber. The 6-inch sewer drain for the entire building was clogged. The plumber said it was the worst clog he had seen in 15 years. The clog consisted of washcloths and toilet paper. There were more than 7 inches of material obstructing the pipe. It was so severe that sewage backed up into the laundry room, the elevator shaft drain, and the first-floor suites nearest the main outlet. Solid turds were left at the bottom of that shaft. I quit about a week later for unrelated reasons. Story 15. Keys. Trash. Bugs if the building is in very poor condition. Mostly dirt and dust. Once I found a paint roller the previous tenant had left. It was stuck to the floor. Not much can get between the sill and the landing. Story 16. Surprisingly, nothing too extreme. I am not an elevator technician, but I am an electrician, so I find myself in pits from time to time. I have found identification badges, credit cards, and coins. Once I found a red pen that was out of ink. Story 17. I work security in a large department store. We routinely had to open elevator doors and access panels to retrieve dropped keys, wallets, and phones. On one occasion, we recovered a gold necklace worth $2,500 that was covered in feces. A would-be shoplifter had hurried out of the jewelry department and concealed the necklace while in the elevator. When he realized we were waiting for him at the exit level, he went back up a floor, removed it, and dropped it down the shaft. We arrested him anyway, much to his surprise. Story 18. I work for a major transit hub. We have our own trade departments. I work in elevators. The weirdest things I have found are a Chucky doll head, 13 rubber duckies in one pit, used drug needles almost daily, a silicone gimp mask. Every day is an adventure. Story 19. At a place where my wife used to work, there was a body. There was a crash from the elevator area. The boss went to see what it was, came back white as a sheet and said, "Do not go out there." 2 maintenance men had been working on the elevator. One was at the bottom of the shaft, and the other made a single small error. The single most unusual item ever found at the bottom of an elevator shaft was a Wright R-2600 radial aircraft engine, discovered on July 28, 1945, in the Empire State Building. Story 20. I used to work in an old 22-story building that had the first automated elevator system in our state. The idea was to control the flow of people in the lobby. You pushed the button for your floor, and the system told you which elevator to take. The elevators made sure the crowds spread out across the large lobby. It was also the first time I had seen automatic door sensors in use. I worked on the executive floor, where long-winded executives often stopped me as I left. I got used to passing my hand through the doors to interrupt the sensor and hold the doors open. You guessed it, my left hand did not trigger the sensor. The doors closed on my hand, but they could not close completely because of my heavy engagement and wedding rings. They crushed my rings, and I lost a 2-carat diamond 22 stories below. My hand was only bruised. Thank goodness for a safety shutoff. I like to think that someday someone will find a tiny treasure. Story 21. I am not an elevator technician, but someone will eventually find a Kindle at the bottom of an elevator shaft in a Toronto hotel. Rule 1. Always check that you zipped your carry-on bag and did not leave a gap at the bottom. Rule 2. A Kindle can fit through a small zipper gap in a carry-on bag and into an elevator shaft. Story 22. I am not an elevator repair person, but you would be shocked by the number of nurses who dropped their keys down the shaft. They were 20 stories up and 2 buildings away from the parking garage, yet already had their keys in hand. I had to call maintenance all the time to retrieve them. Story 23. I worked as a phlebotomist in a hospital and had just drawn blood from an elderly man. As I pushed my small cart into the elevator to return to the laboratory, his blood vials rolled off and both vials fell through the gap into the elevator shaft. I felt terrible and immediately went back to tell him I would need to draw his blood again. He was thrilled. He said he was excited that his blood would remain in the shaft for eternity. He was a very funny man. Story 24. I retired after 40 years in the trade. The best thing I ever found was a $20 bill. I know a man who found a $7,000 diamond ring, kept it for 6 months, and when no one asked about it, he gave it to his wife. Story 25. Empty drug bags, used condoms, needles, money, and discarded lottery tickets are usually the norm. Sometimes there is also a roach infestation. Story 26. Why have so many people in the comments found purple dildos? Story 27. It was not elevator maintenance, but one time I dropped a set of cartwheels into the gap. I'm sure a maintenance worker would be concerned to find loose wheels in the elevator of a nursing home. Imagine an elderly person walking around with a walker without wheels. Story 28. At least 6 people saw a purple dildo and everyone left it there. Either they all saw the same one, or purple dildos are a more common sight at the bottom of the elevator shaft. I am absolutely sure everyone is telling the truth. Story 29. A doll sitting upright in a corner. A little bag of speed. Story 30. This is not exactly an answer to the question, but it is related. When we responded to a report of broken doors, we did not expect that someone, for unknown reasons, had stolen one half of the elevator door. Story 31. A whole salmon and a king crab in the same kitchen elevator of a seafood restaurant. $100 in $20 bills. Many needles and condoms. Story 32. In 1988, the same bones were rediscovered when a new elevator shaft near the south parking lot on Elm Street was excavated. On one day, 11 skulls and 88 pounds of bones were found, followed by another 119 pounds. The Inquirer reported they were being stored at the morgue. Cincinnati Music Hall was constructed on land that had previously been a children's home, which had been built atop a potter's field, itself on a burial site and on bulldozed indigenous mounds. Story 33. Holy shit, I asked a guy this at work last night. It wasn't as surprising as I expected. It was just a ball, a very large ball that had no business being down there. Then I asked if he ever left anything strange down there for the next guy. He went quiet, slowly turned to me, and pulled a Barbie out of his pocket. Story 34. A few months ago, we had a floridly psychotic patient brought into the hospital. He was staring into space and could not form a coherent sentence. A fire alarm at an apartment building prompted the fire department to investigate, and they found a man living in an elevator shaft. He had apparently been there for some time. Most of the delusions he described, as far as I could tell, involved time travel and Jesus, so we joked that he was not actually psychotic but a time-traveling Jesus. Story 35. It depends on the building or neighborhood. I have seen everything from dirty diapers to used needles, keys, wallets, phones, picture frames, sandwiches, and, as the icing on the cake, a Tamagotchi. No, it did not work. We typically trashed everything unless it was valuable. I always turned jewelry into the management's office, but I worked with people who definitely sold valuables for unsavory purposes. Too long. Did not read. The crack between the car and the door sill is a black hole for objects. Story 36. Holy fuck. This subreddit really never runs out of questions. Story 37. The company where I worked had an old, heavy-duty freight elevator that was semi-abandoned. It was more like an automotive lift with giant pistons embedded in the ground but installed in an elevator shaft. When they needed to move something huge, they filled the hydraulic system with oil. It took hundreds of gallons to top off the system, including the giant pistons, and they would use it for a day. A few months later, when they tried to use it again, the oil was gone. Once, they planned to use it the following day, so maintenance pumped in the oil to get ready. The next day, there was no oil. They refilled it the morning of the move and got one lift out of it before it stopped. The company knew oil was leaking into the ground beneath the plant and did not care. They finally abandoned the lift for good when maintenance staff threatened to report the illegal dumping of hydraulic oil. Story 38. I had to clean some damaged insulation at the top of the elevator shaft. The maintenance technician brought the elevator to the second floor, and we went to the top to operate it. On the elevator cabin were a few pairs of women's underwear and used condoms. Someone had been having sex on top of the elevator. How they got there was a mystery because it was a very modern elevator and you need a special key to open the control box to access the top. Story 39. In college, I pulled out my lanyard on which my Motorola Razr was hanging. The phone flew up and fell into the gap between the elevator and the floor, dropping 4 floors. Maintenance climbed down and retrieved it. The phone barely had a scratch. Story 40. My dad has been an elevator repairman for almost 30 years. His best find to date was a $12,000 yellow diamond engagement ring. He tried for a while to find the owner, but eventually he got to keep it. Story 41. I have been in the game for 12 years now. I found a full Christmas tree last month. Other finds include 5,000 pounds in 20-pound notes, a very large bag of drugs weighing approximately 5 kilograms, brand new shoes by the box load, and a severed finger. Backstory. The Christmas tree was found this year on a council estate in August. Photos were taken for the office because it was rather amusing. I visit this lift every month. The money and the drugs were found in the same lift about 3 months apart 7 years ago. The money was split between me and my engineer because I was an apprentice at the time. The drugs were handed to security. The shoes were found in a passenger and staff lift at the back of JD Sports. I suspect a staff member was hiding them there and loading them into a car at the end of his shift. The police were involved. The severed finger was found in a very expensive apartment building. We are talking about 50 floors and apartments worth over £1 million. Again, the police and emergency services were involved. Story 42. This is an obligatory, not one of the elevator maintenance staff story. My dad had a Razr when those phones were still popular. To annoy him, my mom changed the ringtone to a meowing cat. He hated it but did not change it. One day at work, he got out of the elevator and accidentally dropped his phone into the gap between the elevator car and the doors. He called maintenance and asked if they could retrieve it, but they said they could not. Standing outside the elevator, he had an idea. He ran into a nearby office, borrowed a coworker's desk phone, and called his own number a few times. A few minutes later, someone called security, hysterically reporting that a cat was stuck in the elevator shaft. A few people in the elevator at the time corroborated the story. The elevator maintenance staff ran the elevator up the shaft and shone a light down. My dad and some others stood by the open shaft doors, looking down. He said he did not see a cat but thought he saw his phone and asked if they could retrieve it for him. They retrieved it. Story 43. I found the serious tag of the original poster, which they seemed to have dropped. Story 44. Elevator repairman here. I haven't found anything crazy, just the normal stuff. Cockroaches, underwear, and a couple of dollars. Since you're reading this, I'll let you in on a little-known feature. Elevators have a tipping feature. If you slip money down between the door sill into the pit, the elevator will get you to your floor faster. If you put in enough money, it will skip all other calls and bring you directly to your floor. You're welcome. Story 45. I have found identification cards, keys, small dead animals such as lizards and rats, lots of cobwebs, hypodermic needles, one AirPod, and similar items. The most unusual thing I have found as a repair technician is a clean pit. The service technicians do not seem to clean anything. Story 46. A handgun was hidden behind the elevator door tracks. I have often found keys, tools, money, drugs, and tampons. Once I found a cat skeleton. I still wonder how it got in. Story 47. I am not an elevator maintenance worker, but I remember when I was about 10, I had a Nokia 3310, one of the brick models. I dropped it into the gap at the bottom of the elevator shaft between the 6th and 7th floors. It stayed down there for months until I saw an elevator maintenance worker and asked him to take a look. Not only was it still there and unbroken, it still had battery power. Those were the days. Story 48. I am not an elevator maintenance worker, but I have been in dozens of elevator shafts for work. I am an explosive ordnance disposal technician, and when I was in the United States Army, I did many missions involving the President of the United States and other very important people in conjunction with the Secret Service. They do not have a bomb squad, so they rely on us. It was a great assignment. You get to travel widely and stay in some very nice hotels. The elevator shafts must be cleared to ensure there are no explosive devices. Basically, any place the president or another very important person will go needs to be checked. I have done a fair amount of elevator surfing, which is riding on top of the elevator car. The strangest and funniest thing I saw was a Superman figurine about 12 inches tall that had its feet glued to the top of the elevator. The head was slightly tilted back and the arms pointed upward, so it looked like Superman was flying away when the elevator moved. I have a picture of it saved on an external hard drive somewhere. That was hilarious. Story 49. A purple dildo. I left it there. I found a $20 bill on an escalator in a casino once. I still have it. Most elevator pits are filled with dirt, dust, and random bits of trash. Every once in a while someone drops their keys. Pretty routine. Story 50. Okay, I know this might be messed up, but when I lived in an apartment building with an elevator, I would often leave things in the elevator shaft to mess with the maintenance worker. It started because he was superstitious and paranoid, and he had been a total jerk to my female roommate and had asked her for an alternate payment in exchange for fixing our fireplace. I left things around the apartment complex to bother him. In the elevator shaft, I left a pentagram circled by candles, and in the middle I placed a porcelain doll and 2 knives I had used to clean chickens and deer, still with blood on them. Beneath the stairs on the 1st floor there was a storage space for tools behind a metal door. In the far back corner, behind tools he rarely moved, I put a small mattress and some old Polaroids I bought at an estate sale. I scratched out the eyes and faces on some of them so he would think someone was living under the stairs. On the roof of the building by the air conditioning units, I left a copy of the Satanic Bible that I had gotten from a woman I met on Tinder whom I had slept with. She tried to convert me to Satanism, and I was perfectly happy being a non-believer in all religions. The maintenance worker told our landlord that a satanic which was squatting under the stairs, performing rituals, and practicing witchcraft in the elevator shaft. I moved out with my girlfriend soon after. My old roommate later told me the landlord said the maintenance worker moved out, and the landlord figured out it was me shortly after I left. The landlord thought it was hilarious. Story 51. I'm a fire alarm technician. In buildings with a fire system, we test the detectors in the elevator shaft annually. The elevator technician gets called in, and while he does his inspection, we get access to the detectors. The strangest thing we ever found was in an elevator pit. Hundreds of small balled-up pieces of tin foil all over the floor. We unrolled one, and inside was a roach. Not the insect, but the discarded stub of a joint. Apparently a resident would walk down the stairwell, go into the back alley and smoke a joint. Then he would ball up the roach in a piece of tin foil, and because there was no place to dispose of it and he probably did not want to be seen throwing it away from his apartment, he tossed them down the elevator shaft as he went back up. The concierge knew which resident it was from the security cameras, so he told the resident, "We do not want you throwing tin foil balls down the elevator shaft. If you have anything to throw away, use the bin behind my desk and I will not say a word." Story 52. I found a purple dildo. It was kind of weird, so I left it for the next person to find. I did not expect this to blow up like this, laughing out loud. Story 53. Elevator workers once found an envelope with my name on it and gave it to security. The next time I was in the building working, they gave it to me. It was a letter from a guard who had been fired 6 or 7 years earlier that told me to fuck off. It made me laugh for the rest of the day. Story 54. If anyone found a single AirPod in downtown San Francisco, I'd love to have it back. Story 55. In a twist, I seem to be the first non-elevator worker to experience this. I have lost 2 pairs of glasses down elevator shafts in 2 different cities. The first time it was like slow motion. They fell, I accidentally kicked them while trying to pick them up, and as they skittered away, the elevator doors opened and they slipped down the gap between the doors. Everyone in the elevator froze. We were all shocked by the perfect timing. The second time was less dramatic but similarly unlucky. I watched in a blur as another pair slipped down between the doors. Fortunately, I always carry a backup pair of glasses, so it was not a huge loss. Story 56. I am a cargo weapons elevator technician in the United States Navy. During maintenance of the aft elevator shaft, I once found several used condoms and a valve handle. The strange thing was that the valve handle belonged to a valve in the anchor windlass, which is located at the front of the ship. When we went to put the valve handle back, we found more used condoms. We were not surprised at that point. I was serving on a coeducational ship. Story 57. Hey, I can answer. I once found a shopping trolley. I was called because the elevator stopped above the first floor. It could not go all the way down because of the trolley. There was also urine, condoms, bills, mail, keys, a lot of hair, many spiders, dead animals, and much more. Story 58. Too long. Did not read summary of every comment so far. Purple dildos were left for the next person. Story 59. Just a shout out to elevator maintenance staff. You really lift us up and do not let us down too hard. Seriously. I was on the 10th floor of a hotel trying to get my room key out of my pocket when my AirPods bounced and fell into a gap. I went to the front desk, and in 15 minutes the attendant had retrieved them, delivered them to my room, and they still worked. A true original gangster. Story 60. Once I got to the 4th comment about purple dildos, I'm out. Story 61. I am an elevator technician. My former mechanic worked in the public housing projects in New York City. He climbed on top of the elevator and found an M9 pistol and a bag of cocaine. A full brick. He walked away and returned to find them gone. A man was standing there asking what he had seen. He said he had seen nothing, and the man walked away. Story 62. In 2005, in our small town, a man went missing for 5 days. We found him dead in the elevator shaft of an apartment building where he was visiting relatives on the 8th floor. The elevator door had malfunctioned and opened even when the elevator was on the 9th floor. He stepped inside, fell, and died. Neighbors complained about a smell, and that is how we found him. Story 63. I write software for elevators. I am not a technician, but I have a few facts for this AskReddit question. Elevators that transport cadavers in hospitals, medical schools, and so on require custom software so the general public does not get stuck in the elevator with a cadaver. Many Broadway stages are giant elevators for set design reasons. The software is slightly custom but mostly standard. Elevators are struck by lightning more often than you would think. We are currently writing custom operation modes for active shooter scenarios and coronavirus disease 2019 social distancing measures. We are based in the United States. A lot of people who start working in software become elevator technicians and make a lot of money. It is an extremely dangerous job. Story 64. I am not an elevator technician, but we were serving a warrant at a multi-story building that had been essentially abandoned by the owners. The top floor had been modified with access ways between many of the old apartments by kicking through the drywall. Essentially, most of the top floor was a single combined apartment. We knew the elevator was out, so we took the stairs as soon as we arrived. The building was abandoned to the point of smelling terrible, but there were known squatters. Running stairs with all your gear is not easy. We reached the top floor and started containment. Within a minute or two, we heard calls of contact behind us, followed by shouts to get someone on the ground. The floor was quickly secured with no injuries. Returning to the entry hallway, we learned our suspect had kicked down the drywall opposite the elevator and thrown some bundles down the elevator shaft before he was taken into custody. We asked the people on the ground floor to open the elevator doors and see what was inside. It was a horrible idea. Someone screamed, "Stop!" "No," from the stairwell within seconds. The ground floor of the elevator shaft was filled with filth. Part of the elevator ceiling had caved in, and human waste and discarded items were seeping down. The second floor was worse, filled almost to the top. The building had effectively become a trash chute using the broken elevator shaft. There were dirty diapers, a dead cat, syringes, garbage bags, loose trash, stained toilet paper, broken glass, and many unbroken bottles filled with a golden yellow liquid. It was a horrible, damp mess. I had to rappel from the top to retrieve the bundles that had been thrown down. Thankfully, all the bundles were on top of the pile. I should have found a better way, but I began my descent. If I messed up the rappel, I risked falling onto a mass of rust, used hypodermic needles and human waste. With steady hands, I locked the line, stretched, and reached the bundles. The team then anchored the line and helped guide me to a safe exit. Summary: an abandoned building had evidence thrown into the elevator shaft after occupants had used the shaft as a trash chute, accumulating over 20 feet of waste. Story 65. I was in my second or third week on my first job after college. Our small accounts payable department was located on the 18th floor, the executive level, because there was nowhere else to put it. As the junior staff member, I was in charge of walking down to the post office every day to get the business mail. One day I forgot my work lanyard, which held my door pass and all my keys, so I borrowed the vice president's key to get the mail. Just as the elevator doors opened, I somehow fumbled the keys and they fell perfectly into the seam at the floor. I could hear them clanking all the way down to ground level. It took a week to get the elevator maintenance staff out to retrieve them because it was not an emergency. That week I was sure I would be fired. The vice president disliked me from then on and we no longer spoke, but I was never let go over it. In accounts payable, I received and coded the bill from the elevator company. It was for about $1,000 to open the ground floor door and get the keys. I still have no idea why they never deducted that from my paycheck. Story 66. These AskReddit questions are starting to get really specific. Story 67. Sometime in the 1980s, I accidentally dropped my McDonald's Happy Meal Egg McMuffin Transformer toy into the crack between the elevator car and the elevator shaft. If any of you found one, it is probably mine. Please send it back. I still feel its loss. Story 68. I have one that's relevant. My great-uncle was a truck driver years ago. It was not uncommon then for people to try to steal from his truck. One day some mafia men walked up to the cab, held him at gunpoint, and told him to get down. They brought him up onto the roof and gave him a bag. They said someone was watching him and a person would come to pick up the bag. When they did, he could go home. They warned that if he looked in the bag, the lookout would shoot. He sat up there for 2 hours, but nobody came. He opened the bag and there was a sandwich and a soda inside. He ate the sandwich and walked home. They had stolen the truck. It was later recovered, abandoned. A few months later, the same thing happened. This time, they took him into an abandoned building. When they arrived, he said he did not care about the truck. But, trying to make light of the situation, asked if they had another sandwich. Then they threw him down an elevator shaft in the building. He broke both legs. Fortunately, not long afterward, a police officer was passing by and heard him screaming. He quit driving trucks after that. Story 69. Nothing was ever really weird. Mostly keys and empty bags of various drugs. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.